Approximately at 1,600 feet from the entranceway, a little over a quarter mile, and approximately 200 feet below the surface. This is a drift tunnel. If I were to take the brake off of this unit, it would actually roll out of the mine itself. Because being a drift tunnel is back in the day when they were doing this, they were everything that they were doing, and they were like watching the dollars. So being a drift tunnel, it's 8 foot higher here than the entranceway. They dug this tunnel in here to actually drain the water off the mountain. When coal was discovered up on top of some hill area in this area, back in the late 1700s, they dug down on the tops, deep as they could with picks and shovels. The technology had that time frame, and they were being restricted by the water filling the holes. They knew holes under their feet, but they just couldn't get it. So actually, they dug this tunnel to drain the water off the mountain to access those veins they knew were under their feet up on the surface. So they dug it at the water level again, being a drift tunnel. Water would flow down out of the mine. Second reason that it was a drift tunnel is that fuel power. The mules would pull that full coal car and slike grade downhill, bring an empty car, then slike grade uphill. That was the thought process. I'm going to let Zach pull out with that. You'll notice that it's going to be a little noisy. It was actually a lot noisier when it was full production here because you had people drilling, you had people blasting, people loading, and cars here through the mine. Area of the mine, as sometimes you see in a movie that there's wood up overhead, like for support of the roof. Since this is basically through a lot of solid rock, what they did in this area of the mine, they placed anchor bolts in. So where you look up overhead, there's anchor bolts basically everywhere in here. There's anchor bolts everywhere. So what they did is an anchor bolt's a long piece of metal rod, 3, 4 foot, 5 foot long, and expandable head. So from the edge that was disturbed up into the more solid material, they drill the holes, place the anchor bolts in, piece of plate iron, nut on the bolt, tightened up to make this important. They're in here looking for 7 mineable veins of coal within this valley. First vein is the orchard vein right here where we get off of the platform. It's enclosed with wood on both sides. Limited access because they don't people tour it. But so that is the location of one of the first veins, large enough to mine. There's lots of veins that fall in here, but some of them are small, and it really wasn't worth their time and effort. Okay, folks, this is the second vein of coal. This is called the Primrose vein, if you've ever heard of it or not. If you're from within the area. But tucked back in here is a piece of machinery that the miners call a Go Devil. There's a steam-driven rotary drum piece of equipment that would roll up, wire rope, steel cable, whatever you like to call it. And it was attached to this small little dolly. That dolly ran on a set of tracks. If we walk down here, you can see there's a small set of tracks within the tracks that the cars drove in on. That dolly ran on that set of tracks. Back up to my right to the elevator shaft that's up here. When the full coal cars come up from underneath, they would hook this little dolly to it, operate it by pulling this lever, will retract up into this location, disconnecting the trolley, a mule would come off the side tunnel, hook the mule up to the car, and take it for a walk out. This was steam driven, 1855 up to 1931, that's when the mine was converted to electricity. See some electrical components are there. They did the cement work, steel work, and installed electricity for the lighting within the mine itself. This being a second vein of coal, I want to explain. Some people don't know how coal came about, or like these layers of rock, they're in between the coal. I'm going to talk a little bit about climate change, but not in a political sense. I don't have, much to say about any politicians, but anyhow, that's good anyhow. But anyhow, with this climate change a little bit, how coal was formed. You have to go back 330, 350 million years ago. This area of Pennsylvania was not what it looks like today. One flat, big swampy area. As best I can describe it, like the Everglades in Florida, bayous down in Louisiana, the salt flats or marshes down along the Jersey coast, and these swampy, boggy, peat bog, whatever you want to call it, however you would picture it in your mind. And what is coal? Coal is actually vegetation, trees, bushes, grass, shrubs, leaves, twigs, all of that. So you had, back in those days, now they say it's carbon capture. So back in those days, those trees grew, they breathed in the atmosphere, held the carbon within, like all the oxygen, right? Now it's captured inside them, but everything has a life cycle. As those trees died off, they fell over into the mud, muck, and mire, started to sink and decay, starting another cycle. So it became from a living tree, I'll use it as a tree. It became lignite. From lignite, it turns into bituminous coal. From bituminous coal, it becomes anthracite coal. From anthracite coal, it becomes graphite, which we still use in pencils. And that takes quite a bit of time. This area of Pennsylvania where these veins of coal are, there's a slate seam right next to the coal. Within that, that's where you find a lot of fossils. Those fossils will show you that they made up from that time frame to this present time frame of a semi-tropical location. That's how it mates up. So the area you could assume was an awful lot warmer than it is today, on the warming side. So what happened is now that material laid flat, like within the mud and muck and mire. Now the rock that you see from where we got off the train car to here, a lot of rock is in between them. I'll say like the whole world goes around and around in a circle, it's going to come around again and again. But all of that rock at one time was up on top of these mountains. The rock from where we're standing within this vein, at least I am, to the furthest light way down to my right, that's all rock. There's another vein of coal down there. All that rock was up on these Appalachian Mountains. The Appalachian Mountains are older than what the Rocky Mountains are. But the reason things change is because everything always changes, it's constant. Continental drift. North America came away from Africa. These Appalachian Mountains were formed. What happened is, as I take my arms, this valley was flat. My arms and fingers represent the coal that laid within the dirt here. So what happened is, as the mountains formed, just like my raising my arms, these are the ridge lines on both sides of this valley. The coal was discovered up on the surface. There's called an outcrop that actually was pushed out onto the surface, just like my fingers are thinner than my forearms down into my shoulders. It's thicker the further you come down. So the further you follow these veins down, the thicker they get. Thickest being down in my shoulder area. This vein of coal here now runs up to the surface, 200 feet above me. Like would follow down my arms down across to where my shoulders are, down at the depth of 2,000 feet. That coal is about 200 feet on there, rough estimates. Okay. These veins of coal run from, if you're in Jim Thorpe, which is 9 miles that direction, face back this way. Your back's to the Lehigh River, you're facing back this way. These veins of coal run for 65 miles to upper Dauphin County, state capital Harrisburg. That's how far they run. Okay. Again, when this valley was formed, up and over, and such like that, that's what hardened the coal. Took it from bituminous stage, that extra pressure turned it into hard coal, anthracite coal. The only president is 125 square miles of northeastern Pennsylvania. Okay, anything else I want to throw out? Yeah, like I was saying, this rock here was up on top of the mountains. And the reason you got the different layers is because as everything was wearing down through wind erosion, trees grow with their roots, grasses with the roots down into the rocks, start breaking it down. In the winter you get water runs into the crevices and freezes and breaks it down. So at one time it was a rock, right? Next time it becomes dirt. Again, it turns back to rock again, full circle. Again, I say kind of like jokingly, but a little bit of seriousness now, like, natural gas, oil and coal is a renewable resource. It might take 300 million years to get there, but who gets to call the time frame? I'm just saying, you know what I mean, because they see about, so much with the sun coming up and, until the next day. But it is a renewable resource because, the winter's still coming, the process continues. Right? Rather slowly in some people's minds, but that's, still a process, okay? If you look here, I have my light shining on the thermometer. It's like showing 50 degrees. I got to talk to some people up at the museum a little bit that I think I said it was 50 in here. You come in on a hot day today, and I have no idea because I've been here since early morning. I don't know what the temperature is outside. Maybe, hopefully, it's up at close to 90. I don't know, high 80s. I don't know for sure. But anyway, you walk in here, there is a nice temperature change. Again, in a different aspect, you come here in January, February, there's a foot of snow on the ground and it's 0 outside. Come in here, it's 50 degrees. Like geothermal keeps this constant temperature like a natural refrigeration. If you look at this block room on this side, where the thermometer light is shining, at one time this was a maintenance repair shop. The elevator system that's here, the shaft, has access to the lower levels within the mine. So anything that broke within the mine, they would bring it up the elevator system, take it to the repair shop and repair it. They wouldn't waste their time taking it that quarter mile outside of the mine. That was just wasting time. So they're still back in those time frames. They were still keeping the work close to the workers. At a different time frame, it was because they dug coal out of here for 120 years. This is like a tourable mine, 167 years. That's from 1855 up to the present date. So this is like the oldest anthracite mine that you could actually get yourself into. But over that 120 years of production, as being a foreman shop at one time, foremen do what foremen do, keep track of the workers in and off their shift, make sure that they make their production quota for work, and get home safely, out of the mine, exit the mine at the end of their shift. And at times, it was an immigrant workforce that worked in here. You had upwards of 6 different languages were spoken in this mine at some times, and the foremen were actually translators, to make sure everything worked. If you look to my left here, I'll be shining my light straight out in front of you, a little bit to your left though. Up on the surface there's a head frame. That head frame up there again, the equipment was basically all the same, steam-driven rotary drum, to wrap up that wire rope or cable. Went up over those 2 large metal sheaves or wheels on the top, how you like to call them. That wire rope actually comes down here and attaches to these chains, which attaches to these safety bonnets, which are on these platforms. Underneath the bonnet, handholds for the miners to hold on to if they were lucky enough to get a ride up and down. And if you look, this is a loading platform, so the construction's a little bit different than in the rest of the tunnel. I should say the shaft up and down. But the basics is the same. It's a wooden frame within an open rock wall. So it's above and below this location here. There's large timbers that are set all the way down, lining the shaft above us and below us. There's, so every once in a while some small pieces of wood comes down because it is still, there's no way like stopping the process. These platforms have been stationary here since 1972. But I just want to say the depth of the shaft now. We're, from the surface down, we're down approximately 200 feet. Level 2 is 200 feet below us. Level 3 is 200 feet below that. Level 4 is 200 feet again below that one for a total depth of 800 feet. So they were down digging coal down at the 800-foot level, but most of the coal, the thickest veins, are still down at that 2,000-foot level. Some of the larger veins where they did most of their digging are further into this mountain here because these veins that you're seeing each have different names, but they're different thicknesses and quality of the carbon content with them. Some of the wider veins are they're like over 20 feet thick, further back into the mountain.
So there's still plenty of coal down there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And worth a good buck too.
They have light when there wasn't electricity.
They used to use candles.
Okay.
After candles, they would use the oil-based wick lanterns, which is similar to like a tiki lantern today. Okay. Fuel was whale oil, so it had about a 2-inch yellow flame off the top. Then, as technology progressed, the next stage after that, I believe they're carbide lanterns, lights. There was 2 chambers. You had water in one side of the chamber. You had that rock carbide down in the bottom, a little needle valve that would actually let water drip down into that carbide. Then a chemical reaction would take place, making what you might have heard today, muffler shops use it, steel workers use it, called acetylene gas for cutting steel with a torch. And that gas would then come out, and they had a little piece of flint that they would try to get at the light, and then they had their light. And as the water, they'd go out, they had to get a little bit more water, or spit, whatever, whatever. Hey, you gotta do what you gotta do, and everything or anything works, you know what I'm saying? So that's what they did. And then the newer ones like this is a battery pack. Those carbide, you can still get them. I know you can buy that carbide on Walmart.com, okay? You got everything just about. Okay, so the reason this mine stopped production in 1972 is Hurricane Agnes came into this area. So in 1972, it started off down in the Gulf as a hurricane. Of course, once it comes inland a couple miles, they downgrade it to a tropical storm, but they keep the name. It progressed up into this area of Pennsylvania, centered the storm slightly northwest, where it became a cut-off tropical storm. Sat here for several days, just dumping rain. This being a hole in the ground, guess where the water went? Right down the hole, right? The pumps that are down the second, third, and fourth level, they're trying their best, their little heart out to pump as much you could, but they have restrictions. It's called their capacity, whether it's a gallon a minute, 100 gallons a minute, 1,000 gallons a minute, don't much matter. And you get 1 or 2 gallons more than what the pump's on, and guess what? The ship starts going down. So fourth level fill, third level fill, second level fill, the water came up to this level. The coal cars on this level are floating around like the gondola cars over in Venice, Italy. And that was the end of the mine. Back in that time frame, historically speaking, within America, they were building an awful lot of nuclear power plants for generation of electricity. You were still dealing with cheaper oil coming out of the Middle East. Back in '72, that whole process changed in 1974 after some mines closed, because that was, which I hope we don't go back to it again, because I remember it the first time, even on all license plate numbers for the days you could get fuel, and no more than 10 gallons. That was in my time frame. Okay, with the oil embargo. So they're talking about that now with the summer because of, I'm not getting political. Anyhow, the storm drifted away. The water within the mountain now has now down to what is the natural water table within this mountain. But level 4 is underwater, level 3 is underwater, and the water's up above level 3. But from an area up here, we're gonna take a walk up. It's a guarded area. We have it lit. You can look in there and see those large timbers, which I was saying line the shafts. So as you follow those timbers, as you're looking all the way down, all the way down, all the way down, all the way, right? Hold your hat so you don't lose it. And you look down, you're looking down 250 feet, 25 stories to see where the water is. Now, there's that much more mine underwater. Now, as you get here, you can see this guarded area. You can see that. You can see the wood, the timbers. And you have to look in as far as what I'm looking here, holding my hat so I don't lose it. And then you can look straight down, and you're down 25 stories, 250 feet. That's where the water level is.
Can you see it?
Oh, wow.
And there's that much more mine underwater.
Good grief.
In the earliest days, basically it was just, everything was hands-on in here. You would take a bar like this, with just an iron bar with a hardened tip. It was called a strike bar. You would pick this bar up, you put it over your shoulder, put it place up against the rock face, and a co-worker would hit it with a sledgehammer. Like a handheld masonry bit. Give it a quarter turn, half turn, hit it again, and you pounded your holes into the rock. When you got the holes in deep enough, what you did is you packed black powder, which was a gunpowder back in the earliest days. A little bit after the Civil War, they started incorporating dynamite within the mining system, but that was a little bit tricky because how much explosive do you use, because you don't want to bring the roof down on top. So anyhow, how did they harden this tip? You take it to the blacksmith shop. He's tending the mules anyway. The coal from here is 94% carbon. Get the bellows going there at the blacksmith shop. You're pumping out, get those coals real nice and hot. You would now stick the tip into the fire there, heat treating it. It would actually help draw in some of the carbon. If you heard the words high strength carbon steel, when you add carbon to steel, it strengthens it. You had a drill like this in like the main tunnels. This ran off a compressed air, but the compressed air, they achieved that by having a small air compressor which ran off of steam. But you had to be somewhere where you could get close to a steam line as you're bringing the lines in closer. This bit here is a spiral bit. It's an auger style. If you ever seen like ice fishermen drilling a hole into ice on a lake, or maybe like a wine screw, same type of deal, screwed in and you pop them out. And then the last one here is a leg brace drill. This weighs 75, 80 pounds like a jackhammer would get today. It's 125 years old. So air would fill this cylinder, this piston, right? Forcing the drill bit against the rock face, squeeze the trigger on the handle here and the bit would rotate. Over 125 years, the only thing they could do to improve it is they placed water injectors up on the front end of it to spray water up there where you're creating that rock dust. In today's terms, that would be considered an inhalation hazard. Back in that time frame, you tie a bandana handkerchief around your head and maybe you borrow a little plug tobacco, chewing tobacco off of your friend, and you spit a little bit. This location right here, this is the mule way. This was another way that they got access down to the lower levels within the mine. There's actually, it's a vein of coal, it's a diamond vein which they had dug out. It was big enough that they could use it, to get big enough that they could get a mule through it, to the lower levels. So the way it's designed, and these are just general numbers. If you look at a parking deck in today's terms, to get the one level to the other level, you have to drive your vehicle like a little bit of a zigzag up the ramps to get, each tier up. Same system is here from, say, almost 200 years ago. These are just general terms. It just runs in on a little bit of a flat here, drops down at a 30-degree angle for about 150 feet. There's a turnaround to get the mule to turn around. They don't back up very well. Again, there's another drop down, 30-degree angle for 150 feet. And guess what? You're down on level 2. They cut it again to go to level 3. They cut it again to go down to level 4. When the people that worked in this mine, you got to remember back in the earliest days, there was no transportation. There was no internal combustion engine. You walked. Right? So you walked from your house here, you walked into the mine, you walked down to whichever level that you were. The mule boys were walking with the mules, leading the mules down to whichever level that you were working on, and then out to where that you're digging. That was the process. The miners had a very unique job. Their benefits of their work was when they walked to work in the morning, if they did a good job's work, guess what? You had to walk further home. Because you're always digging further in, you're not digging the entrance way, you're digging further in the bottom. You couldn't get a break no how. And that's how they did it. Okay. One of the other rules was, again, in the company favor, where else would I have gone, that if a worker was injured, sick, even dead, didn't matter to them. Family had 24 hours to replace that worker or they threw you out of your house. And this is before child welfare laws. So back in those days, the company offered children as young as 7 and 8 years old a job over the breaker. The breaker was across the street from the mine here. And what they did is the breaker was a simple clamp where they dug this coal out of these seams and it would come on various sizes, little places, big pieces or whatever, where you came out, that's how it went. They went to the breaker and the breaker, what it did, they broke it down to small pieces. A big chunk you can't shove it through the opening on the door of a steam locomotive on the railroad. So they had to break it down to pieces the size of your fist. They call it stove coal. On other pieces, maybe the size of a walnut or chestnut, something like that, small that you could burn in your fire in your house for heat. And that's what the breaker did. So these children would work at the top end of the breaker. The entranceway to that was called the sleuth bin. That's where they would dump this material at that breaker. Now the kids there, they called them breaker boys. In today's terms, they would probably call them quality control technicians because that was their job. Pick out pieces of rock, slate.
What, baby?
Over here, folks, as you come across over, what I'd like you to do, if you get a chance, take a look up in here, out of that seam that's there. So as you drill your holes out, what you would do is you would pack them with black powder. In the early stage, you pack with black powder, you run your fuses together and down in a little bit. Once you ran the fuses down a little bit, you would yell fire in each direction of these tunnels so other workers in the area would know there's a blast ready to going to take place. Then from the candle on your cap, you would light the fuse and the fuse would go up and you would have an explosion. Now, if anybody pictures from the movies, Civil War time frame, like those cannons or those muskets that they were shooting, the amount of white smoke that comes out of them. So you're in here, you're breathing that air. There's nowhere else to go, right? So you're breathing that air in here, and that's one of the reasons that the miners died. They started in the breaker at a young age, and they worked in here to like their early 50s. A lot of them were dying from black lung disease. because that foul air, the mules themselves will die at a young age because they're breathing the same air the miners were breathing. So the process is where that explosion took place, and again, it was up to the miner how much you wanted to blast out, and you didn't want to bring the mountain down on you. But an explosion's a round circular event. So the open side that you were working on, of course, the stuff would fall away down the rest of this, the opening that's up in here. So now, when the air cleared enough that you could crawl up in there, all that material you moved by hand, all the way down to the upper end of the chute, the holding area was called the battery. So as that battery filled, you would call for a mule board to come and stop on this cart here. Slide open a piece of wood here from the chute, the coal would fall down, filling the car. As the car would fill, you jam the wood back to stop the flow. So what it is now, when that fell apart, that from the explosion to the open side fell away, but the back half of that explosion, it's all in here, it's all fractured, right? So you're up in there with your coal hammer and chisel, chiseling away on that material, pulling out those pieces. You had to watch how big of a chunk that you were pulling out. You're up on an angle, like 1 ton of coal is a little bit over, like 1 cubic yard. If you pull out too big of a piece and it wants to roll downhill, where are you gonna run? It's gonna roll up on top of you. You know what I'm saying? Like it's, you're just a speed bump. Just so you can see how some people get injured like that. Because the miner's job will be repetitive over and over again. You start with a clean face, drill your holes, set off an explosion, remove that material, clean up the face enough again, then you can start re-drilling more holes again. That's what they did over and over again. That's what their job was. They do coal over. That's what they did. If you go up this tunnel here behind me, there's a utility shaft. Cuts down to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th level. The black pipe that's along this back wall here, some of the original steam lines that went all the way down to feed steam to those pumping stations down there. They pump the water up to this level, into this trough that's here, and this is that drift tunnel here. It's like where this water here now would flow out of the mine out. That's how I used to get rid of the water. If you look down the tunnel from the direction that we came from, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go into this room here. I'm gonna turn my lantern on. I'm just gonna go to this room, shut the lights off, and come back out here with my lantern on and just talk for a little bit. Okay, folks, lights out. Now, when I come out here, I don't want to get anybody in the eyes with this light. It'll be all intense. But if you look down the tunnel from the direction that we came, if I shine my light down, you can see this is a modern miner's cap, battery power. You can look down there at 100 feet. Again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on my hand. I'm going to put my hand over the light for a second and continue to talk. Now, as your eyes adjust to the darkness, how'd you like to be a 12-year-old boy leading a mule through here and your candle burns out? Now you got to try and replace the candle and relight it. How'd you like to be a miner holding that strike bar, having your buddy behind you swinging out with a sledgehammer with 1 candle power? Or a miner crawling up in that hole up there after you set off an explosion, going up there to clean up that face that you could start, drilling another set of holes. You can see it was rather, dangerous work, something that I probably wouldn't be able to do, nor would I would like to. I'm going to turn the lights back on. So there's 2 good things we just learned with this little experiment that we did. Number 1, nobody's afraid of the dark, right? That's a good thing. And number 2, let me check first. No pickpockets are working, I think. Okay, so we're all good. I'm just trying to explain a little bit how hard it was in here under the conditions that they worked in. If a miner got hurt in here in the early stages, you could see rather easily that they could. If you got hurt bad enough, the closest medical was 24 miles. You'd have to take you by horse and buggy up to Ashland. Up there was the closest hospital. So the miners in 1890 now, because of the conditions that they were working under, they formed a union called United Mine Workers. It's a union yet today, viable union, United Mine Workers. And they were looking for 3 basics. Number 1, they wanted to get away from that 60-hour work week. They wanted to go down to a 40-hour work week. They wanted to get away from using bitcoins or a company script, right? They wanted real U.S. currency. And last, they're looking for, health and safety, medical benefits, a little bit safer working conditions. But from that 1890s, it took up until 1931 when they did the steelwork cement, and electricity was through Pennsylvania legislative action that they actually had what they called was a hospital in here. They hired a doctor, Dr. John Young. He was the medical staff in here. In its day, this was a nice white pristine building, that steam heat, electricity, running water, medical supplies. He was the on-staff medical in there. People had their life saved within this room. People actually died within this room. There was quite a few fatalities within this mine system that's here. He actually formed a mine rescue team with the workers and taught them basic first aid for the level of treatment back in that time. Folks, as you can see here, this is a rock face. As I shine my light up overhead, you can see it transitions to anthracite coal. So it's thick, shiny black anthracite coal up overhead to the opposite side. If you follow my light to my left, your right, and you can see it mates up against the rock face. So it's about 5 yards of solid, thick seam of coal, almost like the black, like the chocolate icing between 2 layers of cake, my favorite flavor, by matter of fact. But anyway, this runs solid coal up to the surface and down. So you can actually see there's coal that's here. If you look up this opening that's here, and you can take a look up in there, and that goes up 100 and some feet. What they did is they crawled up in there. That's an air shaft up in there also that they put in. So as you go up 100 feet, there's a parallel tunnel above us to what we're standing in here, where they removed the coal off in both directions. So you get a small guy up in that, and then somebody asked me, he says, well, how small is a small Irishman? I said, well, I really don't know. All I know for a fact is that they're a little bit taller than Leprechaun. You'll notice we kind of walked around in a circle. Our Uber's gonna come in shortly down to catch up with us. Probably within like 3 or 4 minutes. He's probably loading up the people outside now. I want to thank you for coming in for a tour today. I understand that anthracite coal, it's a fossil fuel, it gets a bad rap because it's a fossil fuel, and they're worrying about the atmosphere and such like that. But historically speaking, if you go back to pre-Civil War times, historically speaking, if you take iron ore, limestone, and this anthracite coal, you needed a carbon out of it, put it in a blast furnace, it'll have steel. Right, it helped win the Civil War, World War I, World War II. It fed the Industrial Revolution, heated homes, factories, plants, created an awful lot of electricity. You still need it yet today for metallurgical type uses, because if you're driving a Tesla, I really don't care, you still need a steel frame for the car or a steel frame for your battery compartment. You still need what you need. There's no getting around it. They put anthracite coal in charcoal briquettes, they put it in water filters. Like I say, metallurgical use, they still use it for that. They make titanium dioxide, which is a white paint with it yet. Just some of its uses, so. That's all I have to say. I hope you enjoy yourself. We can take a walk down the platform. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.